I don't know. It's not, that's what I didn't want to do. That's why I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to be a cartoonist. So that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go to college and write some papers and learn about stuff that I really wasn't interested in. But I've done, I'm sure, graduate level work on the Trojan War.
But the difference is
But it's
it's
all
research
stuff
you
I
want to
want to do.
do. Yeah.
It's like, yes, it's like, I want to know this. I got to get more. I love doing the research.
It's like you love learning, but you don't want to be forced to learn.
Exactly. Yes.
And instead of writing a paper, you'll just do a whole comic book about it.
Yes.
Welcome to the Comics Cube, everyone. Today I'm with Eric Shanower. How are
Hi,
you?
Duy. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing okay. My first question to almost every creator who comes onto the show is why comics? What was the spark? And what was also the spark in you starting to make them as opposed to just being a fan?
Well, I've loved comics ever since I was really little. The first comics I remember reading, or I had to have them read to me, were The Adventures of Tintin, which were serialized in this magazine called Children's Digest when I was little. And I remember my mom reading them to me. I really liked them. When I found out that they were, like graphic novels, and they started getting published in the US in full color, I bought them. And there was more than had been serialized. I also remember reading comics in the Sunday newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any specific memories of those, except that I didn't like Pogo.
That is not a popular opinion.
Years later, when I was 12 years old, I came across a Pogo book in the store, and I was really intrigued because I really liked the artwork, but I remembered not liking it when I was a little, and but I bought it anyway because the artwork was so intriguing, and I really liked it, and I love Pogo now. I think it is one of the greatest comic strips ever. It may be the greatest comic strip ever. I don't know. But as a child, I did not like it. I did not understand it. But I mean, we're talking like 5 years old, so
Yeah.
what do you expect? The first, I liked comics when I was little, but the first comic book I ever bought was an issue of Casper, and some friends had some Harvey comics, Casper, and I remember the Hot Stuff issue, and I really liked them. And so I asked my dad, can I go somewhere to buy a comic book? So he took me to 7-Eleven. They still had spinner racks then, and I bought an issue of Casper, and I guess that was the start. I remember when I was young, sampling lots of different comics from lots of different publishers. I bought some issues of Archie. I remember an issue of Astonishing Tales featuring Khazar and Dr. Doom, which I was kind of fascinated by, but I didn't really like very much. I still have that issue. Actually, I got rid of that issue, but I rebought it again later because it had such meaning for me as a kid. It was drawn by Barry Smith, and the Khazar story was drawn by Barry Smith and written by Roy Thomas. And so the drawing is kind of really, really interesting, as all of Barry Smith stuff is.
Yeah.
But the story is just sort of basic Roy Thomas, over dramatized people, chewing the scenery. And that was not something that appealed to me as a child. I mean, I got into that sort of stuff later as a teenager. But for a while, I was really, really into anything that Harvey Comics published, Casper and Richie Rich, especially Richie Rich, for a long time, for a number of years. And that's when Richie Rich had 30 titles every month. And I was sort of obsessed with them. That's what I had to spend my allowance on all the time.
It's lost to history now, isn't it? How big Harvey Comics used to be.
Yeah. And they're gone now, except, I mean, I was actually drawing Casper for the past couple of years because American Mythology had the license. And when I found out, actually a friend of mine had done a cover of the guy who I was in art school with, and I saw it on Facebook, and I'm like, Jeff, what are you doing? Where did you draw this Casper cover for? What is going on? He's like, well, I'm doing this for American Mythology. I said, well, do they have enough work that I don't want to take work away from you, but I mean, they have more? And he said, yeah, sure. So he put me in touch with the editor, who was another guy that we went to school with, Mike Wolfer. And Mike's like, yeah, you want to draw Casper? Sure, we can get you some Casper. So I drew Casper for a few years. It didn't pay very well, but the drawing was pretty easy compared to something like Age of Bronze, where I take, usually like at least 2 days a page on average. And the Casper, I could do 4 pages a day. So it almost made it worth it, what I was getting paid.
There's not a lot of detailed or friendly ghost.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was sort of my first obsession, was Harvey Comics. Later, I started reading DC Comics and Marvel Comics, and it was in high school. I was in 10th grade when I finally decided I'm going to be a cartoonist. I first started drawing comics. I think 4th grade was the first comic that I really remember drawing. A comic strip. I made this like fake newspaper, and I put comic strips in it, of course. So I drew some comics for it. But I also remember this thing I was drawing for my sister. So this adventure thing, which was inspired by this comic strip, which was in this magazine called Kids Magazine, which was all publications of kids' work. Kids would just send in their artwork and stories. And Jeanette Kahn was the editor, who later became the publisher of DC. So I was drawing comics inspired by that. Then in one issue of Little Audrey, which was a Harvey comic, there was a story where Audrey drew herself and her friends in comics. So I go, that's a great idea. I don't know why I hadn't thought of it before, but I started drawing comics of myself and my sister and our friends having these like wild adventures, falling into volcanoes and going into the middle of the earth and stuff like that. So that lasted a few years. And I was also drawing a couple other series. I had this bunch of other comics. I was drawing comics all over the place, and I finally decided, oh, this is what I'll do for a living. When I was a young kid, I had wanted to grow up to write and illustrate books, and I thought that's what I was going to do. It took me until I was like 15 years old where I'm like, I love comics. I can write and draw the stories. Duh, why don't I just become a cartoonist? So that was that. And so here I am today. Drawing comics.
30 years ago, you came up with the idea of for Age of Bronze.
Oh God, yeah.
How does that feel when I put it that way 30 years ago?
I haven't even thought of that, but it's true. Yeah.
But it didn't actually come out till 98. So
yeah.
That was more 23 years ago. For people who are, because I first discovered Age of Bronze in the library back when I was living in the US. For people who are, more superhero fans or focused on a certain genre, can you tell us what Age of Bronze is about?
Age of Bronze is my telling of the complete story of the Trojan War. The Trojan War is a Greek myth. The most famous version of it is Homer's Iliad, which tells one episode of during the last year of the Trojan War. But over the centuries since Homer wrote the Iliad or composed the Iliad, there have been many, many, many different versions of the story. All sorts of episodes have been added onto it down through the years. So I'm taking all of those, all that material, as much as I can find at least, and sort of melding it all together into one long storyline, one coherent storyline, because all these versions do not agree with each other. I've got to make them all agree for this project. And I'm also setting it in the correct time period, which would have been the 13th century BCE. if the Trojan War ever happened, I'm hoping that what I draw is what it would have looked like. I mean, there is some historical basis for conflicts for the city of Troy, for a lot of the Greek civilization that went to attack Troy. So I'm using all the historical aspect as well, all the archaeology and artifacts. And that's what it is. So it's dramatic, it's historical fiction. It's told in a dramatic style. It's not pedantic or anything like that. It's, you follow characters around and they interact with each other just like a regular story.
It being historical fiction, though, how much research do you have to do?
Oh, tons. I mean, there's the Trojan side. The city of Troy was discovered by Heinrich Schliemann in the late 1800s, and there's been several series of excavations at that site since then. The most recent was in the 90s, started in 89, I think. Anyway, when I came up with the idea for Age of Bronze and started doing the research, I discovered that they were digging at Troy right then and coming up with lots of great new discoveries. It had been long enough that technology had progressed far enough that we had so many new tools to make new discoveries at that site. Then there's the Mycenaean civilization, which is the Greek side of the story. Heinrich Schliemann basically discovered them too in the late 1800s, and there's tons and tons of material. So I've had to study all of that. And there's also all the surrounding civilizations of the late Bronze Age world, the Aegean Sea, the world surrounding the Aegean Sea, which is basically the Eastern Mediterranean.
And how much research do you have to do for, like, their customs and their behavior and everything?
Well, it's kind of hard to figure out actually what the people's day-to-day lives were like, because we have pots, we have a little bit of writing, but the writing is mostly lists of things that have been found in palace settings, and they're just sort of inventory lists. So as far as actual historical evidence of how people lived their day-to-day lives and their attitudes, we don't have that much. What I have to look for that sort of thing is to the literature that we have, which starts with Homer's Iliad, and then all the various permutations of the story of the Trojan War that have been created, both in literature, in artwork, in all kinds of forms, dance, sculpture, motion pictures, other comic books, pop songs, all this plays, all this stuff has been created over the centuries. And that's where I look for the story and how the characters interact with each other.
You start the Age of Bronze pretty much at the very beginning. As you mentioned, the Iliad kind of just tackles the last year of it. So you start pretty much from the very beginning. Where is it going to end when it ends? Are you going to go past it? You're going to go to the Odyssey, or?
I'm not going to be doing the Odyssey.
Yeah.
I will be doing the fall of Troy and some aftermath. We have some major works like Trojan Women and a few others, lesser known plays, that I will be covering all that material. When the Achaean heroes depart, that'll basically be the end. Depart the fallen city of Troy.
Who's been your favorite character to work on this whole time?
Well, I mean, they're all fascinating characters. I mean, I love Hector. He's maybe my favorite character in the whole story, the Trojan Prince. Part of the reason is because he's a really good guy. He's just always.
He's got bad luck.
What? Oh yeah.
He just has bad luck.
Well, I mean, they all have. Most of them end tragically, but Hector is trying to do a good thing. I think he has modern sensibilities in the fact that he's not influenced by his society in ways that we feel our society today would naturally feel, that's really odd. He loves his family. He loves his city. He's trying to do the best for his family and his city. Whereas, I love Achilles too, but his motivation is to make his name go down, to last forever. He doesn't, if he's at all dismissed, or he senses that people aren't paying him the respect that his society has told him should be paid to warriors, then he is very upset, and he will do things that are expressions of why he's upset. And that's hard for us. I think it's hard for us to acknowledge or to understand that. That's why I think a lot of people don't like the Iliad, because they just see Achilles as going and throwing this big hissy fit because he didn't get some slave girl that he wanted. The slave girl is not exactly the point. She's just sort of the object that is the turning point. It's because the slave girl is his tribute. And if everybody else is telling him, oh, you don't deserve that tribute, then he's being disrespected. And that is a huge deal, because when you die in this society, you are gone. You go down to Hades and you are a skeleton walking around, and life is gray and boring. And that's all it is for the rest of eternity. So you want your life, you want your name to live on in the land of the living. And if you're disrespected, your name's not going to live.
Were you always a big fan of Greek mythology?
No, I wasn't. I remember I read Greek mythology when I was a kid. I was looking for this one, the Daulaires myths, Greek myths. I loved that book when I was a kid. I read lots of kids' versions of Greek mythology when I was young, and I loved a lot of the stories. And like the movie Jason and the Argonauts, saw that when I was a kid. I still love that movie. There's really cheesy stuff about it, but I still think there's really good stuff about it too. So that's the kind of thing I liked. I was not a fan of the Trojan War. As a kid, I remember reading these versions of the Trojan War, and they were boring. They were boring to me. But if they don't, the Trojan War does not address kids' concerns. It's a really adult story. You have to have experienced a little bit of life to really get it, I think. So it's not a kid-friendly story, not like, the Golden Fleece or something, or
and yet
Perseus
it's taught to
and
children. Is that weird?
It starts with sex. Yeah. It's all about sex. At the beginning, that's all anybody wants. It's like, I want that woman. No, I want that woman. And then you took my woman. I'm going to go and destroy your society. And it ends in incredible violence. Most of the main characters die horribly.
And I always found it weird too when I found out about all that stuff, because I found out about, I think I was taught the Trojan War, fairly at a fairly young age, and I would find out later on that it's all about sex, and I'm like, why did they teach me this when I was young? But I think that's a lot of a lot of old literature. Even something like the Bible is full of that kind of stuff, and that gets taught at a very young age.
Sure, but they don't teach those stories.
They try to avoid those things.
They don't tell you that lots of daughters get their dad drunk and then go sleep with him. But they tell you about the animals 2 by 2 onto the ark. That's a cuddly story.
That kind of stuff. They don't say things. They don't mention what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just that they behaved badly.
Right.
Boom. Right.
They don't say what they were doing. Yeah.
One of the things that I noticed about Age of Bronze when I discovered it around 20 years ago was that the format. You went straight to basically the book form.
No, it was in it was issues. There were 9 issues out before it
Oh,
got collected.
oh, I always just assumed it went straight to the graphic novel format. Did you?
No, it
Yeah.
was 9 issues. Yeah.
hmm Is it? Does it perform better in a particular format though?
Oh yeah, it's much better in graphic novels.
So
Um,
with that, I know
it
you.
sells like it sells in books. It doesn't. We had to stop the issues because well, we're just doing them digitally now, but they weren't selling. So
So you're so now you're doing the issues digitally, and then you're releasing them in a in book
in
format
print,
in hard copy. Yeah.
yes.
Is that where you think, because like you've been working in this business for a long time, is that where you think the business is going in general?
Yeah, yeah.
Like no
I mean,
more.
people have been predicting the death of the floppy for I don't know 15 years now.
hmm
Um, I mean, COVID certainly isn't helping comic stores. Uh, I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen? I think the comic book format will probably always be around. I mean, the pulp magazine format is still sort of around. It's just not a popular form. It's a specialty form for collectors. I think comics as a comic book will probably always be around, but it's going to be much more rarefied specialty form. I think the book format is proving much more resilient these days. I don't think that digital has really caught on. Um, I guess numbers are going up. For a while, I think they were going down. I don't really know, but I don't think the digital format has caught
hmm
on.
Well, I think with digital, the thing that fascinates me is, I mean, if you look at social media, everybody reads comics, right? Like if you see it on your feed, you'll read a comic, but it's always like in these 2 or 3 page spurts, and then you'll just keep scrolling to the next thing. Like, so I think digital is a hard nut to crack
Yeah.
in terms of all that stuff. But I noticed in your work, so your work looks really good in black and white. I know later on you colored it, and it looks really classical, really structurally sound, and you use grids. It's very straightforward storytelling. You have a particular inspiration for telling a story that way?
Not a particular one, no. But I've read comics all my life, all sorts of different comics, all all kinds of comics, like from Pogo and Tintin up through whatever, you know. I mean, I think probably the greatest comic of our lifetime is Love and Rockets, particularly Jaime Hernandez's work. I think he's maybe the greatest living cartoonist at this
Mhm.
point. Um, but so I do not have a particular inspiration. I did approach Age of Bronze in a very straightforward way because I felt that it was not a project that was aimed at a comics reading audience necessarily. That I wanted to be able to reach people who weren't used to reading comics. So I do nothing really, no splashy layouts where you can't really figure out which way you're going. Everything is in a grid. I don't even have bleeds. Um, and I did that because I wanted it to be very, very accessible.
Do you think that kind of stuff, like the fancy layouts and stuff, it does turn off non-comics reading audiences,
Yeah.
or is
Yeah.
it?
People look at a page and they go, I don't even know where to start.
That's interesting. So it's not intuitive. Yeah.
I've run into people throughout my life. Not everybody, no, it's not really, really, really common, but yeah, people go, look, I don't even know how to read these things.
Yeah.
And I look at it from a not and try to put myself outside of comics and go, oh yes, of course. Someone who doesn't read comics all the time, this could be very, very confusing. You have to, as a cartoonist, tell people where to go. What do you read next? What do you look at first? What do you read next? And I don't think a a reader needs at the beginning of every comic. Start at the top left corner and then read across and then go to the next tier. You don't need that. I think possibly if you, in Western culture where we read left to right, I think we can assume that much. But, if you look at early comic strips, they would put a number in every single panel to tell the reader which way to go. And comics were, at least popularly, a new form back in like the 1890s. So you had to tell people how to read these things because they were basically coming to them for the first time. Comics are a lot more ingrained in our culture now, so I think you don't have to number the panels anymore. But still, people who don't read these things and are not familiar with them, you have to make sure that the story, how you read this is clear.
One of the things that I noticed, like even with the grid, though, you do find ways to innovate. There are some instances where you do, the continuous background across multiple panels or even across the full page, even if there's 6 panels in there. Or,
sure, I like trying. I'm not a formalist when it comes to comics. But when I get a good idea for something to do, I really like doing that. But that's not my natural thing. I'm much more story oriented. What is going on with the characters? I'm more oriented toward how is the plot progressing and who are the characters and what are they doing. I'm not as interested in playing with the form as much. When I do get a good idea to play with the form, though, I really like doing it.
You conceived this comic in black and white. Did it change anything when you colored it?
Not consciously. I'm not trying to change my style. But although I assume that eventually it's going to seep in and I'm going to be doing things, I'll go, oh, well, that'll be in the color, or I don't have to do this sort of cheat because it's going to be in color. I haven't really run into that much yet, but I suppose, yeah, someday I'll be a little more relying on color. I'm still in the mindset, though, that I want this the style to look pretty much the same all the way through.
And the original plan, is it still the original plan? 7 books?
Well, yeah, it's 7 parts. The whole story is divided into 7 parts, and that is still as it is. But since I'm going a lot slower, we started putting out part 3 in sections. So there was Betrayal Part 1 and Betrayal Part 2, and there's going to be Betrayal Part 3.
Okay.
And probably Part 4, which will be covering the material from the Iliad. That'll be probably three books too. But the story will be sort of 7 movements. It's still that. That's how I think of it anyway. Whether it really matters when you're sitting down and reading this stack of books, I don't know. I mean, who knows? I just have to draw each page and make sure I get to the end, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter what sort of a container they're published in.
It's worth the wait.
Thank you.
It's worth the wait. So speaking of older comics numbering things, you worked on a Little Nemo. You worked on 2 Little Nemo tributes. So Little Margie and Misty Magic Land, that was a Promethea kind of side project with Steve Moore. Promethea was from America's Best Comics with Alan Moore, J.H. Williams. How'd you get tapped for that particular project?
Scott Dunbier, who's an editor at the company. I've known him, I don't know, 20, 30 years, and he knows what my work looks like, and he thought I'd be appropriate for it. So he called me up and said, do you want to work on this? And I said, yes.
Were you a fan of the property before you got onto it, or?
Promethea?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I read the first couple issues. I mean, I've been an Alan Moore fan ever since he was working on Swamp Thing. So I started reading all his stuff not all his stuff, because I didn't read Top 10 at the beginning, from ABC. So I bought the first couple issues of Promethea, and I this is okay, but they're just fighting. This is just like superhero fight scenes all the time. I don't think this is that interesting. So I didn't read past issue 2 or 3. And then at a convention, I went out to lunch with Scott, and he asked me if I would, the same question, like, do I like it? And I told him, well, I read the first couple issues, but it just seemed to degenerate into superheroes fighting, so I wasn't that interested. And he said, well, pick it up now. They were on issue maybe 8 or 9. He says, you might want to go back and read it because it's developed into something a lot more personal to Alan. So I took Scott's advice and I did, and I really, really loved it. It's I think it's one of the best comic series ever.
And how did it feel working with, how was it like working with Steve Moore on that particular, on Little Margie and Misty Magic Land?
Well, I mean, I got the script and it was already written, so I've never actually talked to Steve Moore. I just drew it. It was, I very much enjoyed the opportunity to go back and look at comic strips, not just Little Nemo and Slumberland, but other comic strips of the time, and try to incorporate that whole sort of sense into Little Margie.
Yeah.
And so I liked it. I mean, I had a good time. I did 2 Little Margie stories, and I liked doing them both. The first time, though, there was this character named Chinky, who is this total Asian stereotype. And so after I got the script and I read it, I called Scott, the editor, and I said, I understand totally where this is coming from. This is very of its time, and we're recreating a comic strip of the time. So I don't have a problem with doing the actual work. What I have a problem with is its presentation. Are you going to put some kind of disclaimer on this comic? And he goes, Scott was like, yeah, we will. But it was sort of evident he hadn't even thought about it, which really shocked me at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But they did, and that was really important to me because, like, look, we can't just print this stuff without any comment. We have to set it in some sort of context. So great, we did. And then in the second story, Chinky gets this sort of other thing that happens to him that sort of bursts.
It addresses it.
Bursts the stereotypical racist depiction. Although it's still a little bit racist, but it is bursting the stereotypical racism in a way that would have happened at that time, trying to be not racist. I think it still is kind of racist. But it's okay because this is supposed to be in whatever it was, 1914 or something.
That's what 1914 would have done to address it, yeah.
Yeah. DC reprinted all this stuff in some big deluxe volume later and reprinted the Little Margie stories with the Promethea stuff. And I wrote a forward or an afterward. I wrote a piece that went along with it. And I made sure to try to present it in context too. But then recently, DC is reprinting all this stuff again. And they're like, we're sorry, we have to take this out. We're taking out because of this character. We're not going to reprint this. And so they asked me if I wanted to rewrite the
forward,
the text piece that went along with it. And so I did. But I thought it was really interesting. It's just a reflection of our times. Like, what was it, like 8 to 10 years ago when they were able to reprint it as long as it was within context. Now it's too hot a potato for anybody to touch.
That's interesting because have you seen what's going on with the Muppets?
No,
recently?
I've heard that Disney is gonna has to put a disclaimer on all the Muppet stuff or something like that.
Instead of editing it or not airing it, they're just putting a disclaimer saying some stuff here, is of its time and should not be viewed through the lens of today or whatever it is.
Right.
So that's interesting because now you're saying that they're just taking it out altogether. Oh, that's unfortunate.
Well, it's not integral. You don't have to read the little Margie stories to get the Promethea story. They're just sort of like little addenda to the end. So it's not like they're really, really important to the project.
But they're so good though. You did the last one. You did the last Promethea story.
Oh, well.
If you really think about it.
I'd like them to get reprinted because it has a little bit of residuals every once in a while. But, well, maybe in another 10 years, society will have progressed far enough that, you can look at this stuff and see it for what it is. I don't know.
Given the choice, is that the Promethea you would have wanted to work on? Because there's another Promethea that was all about drawing fantasy landscapes and stuff, and I feel like with something like Age of Bronze, I would have been a more natural fit for you.
Well, do you mean what I would wanted to
if you had a choice? Yeah,
draw more of the, like, do something in the regular series?
Could be, or other flashbacks with those other Prometheas, or
I really liked drawing Promethea in the sort of Little Nemo-esque early 20th century comics page style, and I thought it was a good choice for that, and I really enjoyed it. I was sort of disappointed not to ever be able to work with Alan Moore and draw one of his scripts, but I did enjoy drawing Little Margie. I would not have wanted to take away anything from J.H. Williams drawing the regular series. But if someone said to me today, "Do you want to draw another Promethea project?" I'd be like, "Yeah, sure. What is it? When do you need it, and how much are you going to pay me?"
And what do you think artists of today, maybe younger artists of today, can learn from looking at the early 20th century, turn of the century comic strips like Little Nemo, or Prince Valiant, or Gasoline Alley's my favorite. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what they can learn is their own history. If you're a cartoonist, I think it's valuable to look at all of comics history. You should know about your craft. You can see what's been done, where you'll see a trajectory of where it's going, maybe. I don't know. You won't, if you see what's been done before, then you won't be repeating anything and go, "Oh, I have this great idea." And it's like, no way, such and such cartoons did that back in 1944. What are you talking about? I don't know. It's easier to build on stuff that's already been done than come up with stuff that you think is new that's really not. I think it's very valuable to any cartoonist to be conversant with a wide range of comics.
And with Little Nemo specifically, what is it about Little Nemo that you would you say special? Because you ended up working on Return to Slumberland. In this case, you were writing it. Gabriel Rodriguez is on art.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously with the original Little Nemo, the biggest thing is the artwork. It's so beautiful, this Art Nouveau style, Fantasyland, all these beautiful, beautiful, beautiful architecture, wonderful characters, bizarre characters doing crazy, funny things. The storyline, well, it's reading it in like reprint volumes, you can't go very far before you just like start. I can't get very far before I start falling asleep.
It's rough, isn't it? It's rough.
Winsor McCay, let's just say character development wasn't his forte.
Neither was lettering.
Well,
that's what makes it hard to read for me. So...
yeah, where it starts curving around the edge. Look how far lettering has come. I mean, Little Nemo started in 1905. I mean, lettering wasn't
it's not a priority.
there wasn't a status quo for lettering at that time. And the Yellow Kid had all his dialogue written on the front of his clothing. So over the years, lettering has become more standardized.
Yeah.
And legibility is cartoonists realize that legibility is good.
It's incredible that it took them a while to get to that.
Well, some cartoonists were legible. Cartoonists realized at the time, very early on, that legibility was a priority, and others didn't. I mean, and what comics in the newspaper at the time were just this throwaway thing. Who cared? It wasn't supposed to be art anyway. No one that I know of had very high aspirations for it. Winsor McCay did great work, but he always did great work, so there's no difference on the comic page. But he probably thought no one cared about the story, so he just did whatever happened to amuse him that week, and then was gone.
It is, in fact, like a concept that gives him the complete leeway to draw whatever he wanted, and he was really fast too.
I don't know.
So it wasn't, because I think to do that all in one, because he was doing the daily strips too.
Yes, well, he was doing he was doing political cartoons at the same time and stuff, and those are all incredible, have incredible cross hatching and beautiful work. So yeah, he had to be really fast.
And I think he was doing 3 strips.
Was he doing Stammy Sneeze and what?
And Rarebit Fiend.
Was he doing Rarebit Fiend at the same time?
Yeah, like there was some overlap.
Okay.
But what was it like collaborating with Gabriel on Rodriguez on Return to Slumberland? Like, how tight were your scripts? Who came up with the imagery and
okay. Well, I mean, I wrote full scripts, so Gabriel drew my scripts, and I drew the scripts before I really knew what he was going to be doing. I wrote the scripts before I knew what he was going to be doing. What? I'm trying to remember. There was one double-page spread, I think, in the first issue of all of Slumberland.
Yeah.
Jimmy, the Nemo stand-in, is like sailing down out of the sky, and he sees all Slumberland spread out before him. And I remember like feeling really, really bad writing that, but I'm like, this has got to be in this book. We've got to do this. So I'm like, Gabe, this is the only time I'm going to do this in all these 4 issues, but you're going to have to draw all of Slumberland on this double-page spread. And he did, and I think he liked it. It's not a job I don't think I would have liked, but Gabe's really into drawing architectural stuff, so I think I was perfect. He loved drawing. He loved drawing the book, as far as I know. I mean, that's what he's told me. One of his sons was just about that age, or a little younger than the Nemo character at the time, and he just like sort of poured his feelings for his son, into the character when he was drawing him.
Maybe also thinking about something like, this is something that my son will enjoy reading. Because...
Yeah, I mean, he was drawing Lock and Key. I mean, he couldn't give that. Yeah, he said that. He said, I've been drawing all the stuff that I can't give to my kids. I'm really glad I can give this to my kids.
But all the imagery too, because you had something that Winsor McCay didn't have, which is access to the works of M.C. Escher, and I notice a lot of M.C. Escher in it. And
I did crib from Escher.
Yeah, is he? It seems natural that those kinds of structures would go into the dreamland, right? Into a dream.
Well, there were certain points. If you're going to tell a Little Nemo story, there's certain points you have to hit, and one of those is, a weird dealing. Like I said before, I'm not a formalist, but you have to be a formalist. You have to play with the comics form if you're going to do a Little Nemo story. You have to play with it in some way. So I had to figure out a way to play with the form of comics within the story, and that was my answer. Check that thing off on the list of Little Nemo things that you have to do if you're going to tell a Little Nemo story. I felt a little bit sheepish cribbing so much from Escher, so I tried to throw in other stuff too. But hey, I think the context made it work. And there was one scene where there were 6 pages where one page goes, you read it, and then the next page is that same page except turned upside down with
Yeah.
different dialogue. That I got from an early comic strip called The Upside Downs
Of the Lovekins.
yeah, Little
Yeah.
Lady
Lady
Lovekins,
Lovekins.
something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I can't remember the name or the cartoonist at this point. But it was a strip that you read and then you turned it over and read it again. And it was the same drawings, but the story continued. And so I go, we're going to do that in this book because I don't want to just crib from Escher. I'll crib from this guy too. So I drew thumbnails of those for Gabe. And I said, this is what my intention is. Do whatever you want to for your own style, but these have to work, one way and then has to work the other way, turned upside down. That's the only real, bottom line is that's what has to happen. But I did draw thumbnails for him for that. And he followed them pretty closely, actually. I was surprised at how close he did stay to my thumbnails. One place where he really, really departed was the new character called the Fruncus. Yeah. I designed the character and I sent it to Gabe. I said, this is my design. Use it if you want. You don't have to. And he didn't. He just came up with an entirely new look.
And how does a project like Return to Slumberland even come about, actually? Like,
it came about the same way that the Promethea story did, because Scott Dunbier called me up one day and said, how would you like to write a Little Nemo project? And I said, sure. He goes, well, we already have an artist for it. I already know he knew who he wanted to draw it. He wanted Gabe to draw it. Gabe had done a slightly Little Nemo-esque sequence in Lock and Key. And I guess that's sort of what gave Scott the idea for it, to do a new Little Nemo story, was this sequence in Lock and Key. And so I said, sure, what are you looking for? Are you looking for something very traditional or something really, really bizarre and a different takeoff on Little Nemo? And Scott didn't really have an opinion. And I had long ago talked about publishing a Little Nemo, sort of updated Little Nemo thing that was really psychological, where Nemo was grown up and he had sort of blocked his memories of his Slumberland dreams because something traumatic had really happened at the end. So this is like something he had turned his back on, and he was like in his 50s now, and the dreams were coming back, and a whole lot of drama was going to happen. And I thought, okay, well, this could be the time for me to do this story. Someone's asking for Little Nemo story, so let's do it. But I just kept thinking, I don't know how I'm going to make this work. How can I make it work? Because I was very trepidatious about trying to step into Winsor McCay's shoes. So I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to do a really traditional, like, here is Little Nemo in Slumberland Part 2, because it would fail.
Yeah.
No matter what care I took with it, if I tried to do the same thing over again, it would fail. It would be terrible.
Because that already exists.
Yeah. It's not necessarily fail, but it wouldn't be as good. So one morning I was taking a shower and I'm like, a new kid. I'm like, oh yes, perfect. Nemo will not be in it. It will be happening today. It will be a new kid in the place of Nemo. Then I had to figure out how to make that work. And that's what it ended up as.
Just very simply, everybody keeps calling him Nemo.
Yeah. I thought that was hilarious. Yeah. There's a line in there about, my dad named him after a fish. Actually, that was Chris Ryle's idea. He's one of the editors of the book. So I'm like, oh, that's a great, and Chris just spouted it off as a joke between, like, in the office. He didn't tell me to put it in the book. And I'm like, I'm going to use that. So I did. I thought that was hilarious.
Very cool. Is there? I have to ask. I have to go back to Age of Bronze a bit. What is the current status of Age of Bronze at the moment? Like,
this is issue 35, page 2. I'm on panel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm on panel 6. This is the current status.
wow, you do really tight pencils.
Yeah, I do.
I would have assumed that you just went straight to ink.
No, that would scare me to death.
Like, okay, that's very cool. Okay. And
I'm still working on part 1, the third book with John Dallaire, the colorist. He's still coloring it. I'm still giving him tons and tons of notes every day.
yeah, what was the what's the principle for coloring it? Like, what's the color palette that you're looking at, and like what kind of feel do you want to give it when it's in color?
I never conceived of it for color at the beginning. It only went to color because for a while it was published as an app for iPad, and the publisher said, well, let's do it in color since it doesn't cost any more actually to publish digitally in color than it does in black and white. I'm like, great, yeah. Well, it made sense to me. I'm the one who actually brought it up, and the publisher said, oh, I'm glad you said that. So that publisher was actually who found my colorist, John Dallaire, who is really, really, a patient man, because I give him tons and tons of notes. Anyway, since it had originally been designed and drawn to be published in black and white, I had to sort of think about it, and I did not want it to be overwhelmed by splashy color. So we're just going through very simple, not a lot of modeling, just mostly flat color. The thing that gets the most gradation are skies, because I don't think skies work if it's just flat, or at least they don't work for me, or don't work as well.
Clouds especially, right? Yeah.
Well, it's just like I need a gradation of dark blue up at the top to light blue at the bottom, because that's what life is like. And it just makes the world of the artwork come to life for me in color. A flat blue on the sky just doesn't work for Age of Bronze for me. So that's the principle. Just keep it simple. Let the black and white artwork show. Don't overwhelm it. But I draw really, really detailed costume designs with lots of beads and lots of embroidery, and John colors it all. And I just don't know. I mean, I didn't want to color. When it first started, we didn't publish in color because I wasn't going to have the time. It was more expensive, and we didn't know how the book was going to sell. So black and white was the way to go.
How much more expensive would it have been?
I don't know. I just didn't even think about it. I mean, Image said, yeah, it's going to be more expensive. We think it should be black and white. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I was assuming from the get-go anyway. I don't know. I never did any numbers.
Okay. Because in the Philippines, I know I've asked black and white creators, and they said it would be around 4 times more expensive. And
that sounds reasonable.
It sounds crazy, right?
Well, I mean, you have to run it through the press 3 more times. I don't know.
It's interesting.
3 more plates.
Yeah, but now that you're working on it, it's going to be in color. Right. And I know you said you're not going to try to you're not going to try to change your style. I think that your art style is basically, it works well with color, without color. But does it change your mentality a bit? Makes you relax a bit knowing it's in color? Will you still be releasing these future things in black and white first?
No.
Okay, so
no more black and white.
Straight to color then. Okay.
Yeah, well, the digital, I mean, all the issues are digital now, so there's no point in doing black and white since it costs the same for black and white or digital, black and white or color when you publish digitally. And we're going to be doing the collected volumes in print in color no matter what. So there's no really real place for black and white anymore. a while ago, I had someone write me, someone who was an Age of Bronze fan, and said, I will never buy this in black and white, in color. This is a black and white project. I will never buy it in color. If you go to color, I will stop buying it. I felt like, oh, extremes.
What you gonna do?
So I'm sorry I'm going to lose you as a reader. I'm sorry, but we're going to color. I'm going to do the best job with the color as I can. I think my choices to do flat color, simple color was the correct choice. I think it looks good. I think John's doing a terrific job.
Yeah.
I hope everybody else thinks so, but if they don't, I'm sorry.
What's the fan reaction? What's the fandom like for Age of Bronze?
Well, I don't, since I publish so infrequently now, I don't hear from them very often, except to hear, have you stopped doing it? What's going on? Is there going to be any more? That's what I hear usually now, which is totally understandable.
But on the record, you are committed to finishing it.
Oh, yeah.
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 So you heard it here, folks.
The fans I have really dedicated fans that I love from all walks of life. I knew it was not going to be a diehard comic fan only type of project. Yeah. And from the very beginning, it was designed as this project for a very, very general audience. Anybody, I hope, will read this and enjoy it. And of course, I love all the traditional comics fans who like it and read it. But I love all the other people who don't read comics usually, and they like this. Of course, I attracted a lot of attention in the archaeological community. I mean, I started doing research before any of the material was published, and trying to communicate with archaeologists who were working on stuff that's working on the same material that I was drawing from. So I had created sort of a little bit of a presence there, but after it started coming out, that audience really grew, which I'm delighted with. I'm totally happy with that. I have archaeologist friends now, and it's great.
Awesome. They ever invite you over to digs?
Yes.
Have you gone?
Yes, of course.
Used it as research?
Yes.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
Oh, yeah. In 2010, Jack Davis, who was at that time the director of the American School of Classical Studies in Athens, said before he became director, he says, I'm going to be director over there in Athens. Come over. You need to come over. And his wife, Sherry, who's also an archaeologist, Sherry and I will drive you all to all the sites, all the Mycenaean sites. And I'm like, great. So finally, my partner David and I went, and I spoke at the school at the time. And I also did research in their library. And then Jack and Sherry drove us for several days around Greece, seeing all the Mycenaean sites that have bearing on the Trojan War, and going to museums. So I mean, I had Jack and Sherry right there, so I could ask them questions like, well, what about this? What about that? And Jack at one point said to me, yeah, this is really great because you are asking graduate student level questions. And I mean, I don't have any kind of degree. Straight out of high school, I went to the Joe Kubert School. I am not, I never went to college. So I felt good about that. I wish someone would give me an honorary degree, but
You've done the research, you've done the work.
I don't know. It's not, that's what I didn't want to do. That's why I didn't want to go to college. I wanted to be a cartoonist, so that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to go to college and write some papers and learn about stuff that I really wasn't interested in. But I've done, I'm sure, graduate level work on the Trojan War.
But the difference is it's research you want to do. Yeah.
It's like, yes, it's like, I want to know this. I got to get more. I love doing the research.
It's like you love learning, but you don't want to be forced to learn.
Exactly. Yes.
And instead of writing a paper, you'll just do a whole comic book about it.
Yes, an entire series. for decades of my life.
And look, I mean, I think it's been awesome seeing just how like how these worlds have opened up for you just based on this comic, and you're only halfway done. Like, can you see basically like how it's still gonna keep opening things up for you because of this? Like, and
I don't know what's going to happen. I just try to be open. Yeah, sure. I've realized. Well, you haven't mentioned the word Oz in this time at all.
I haven't, not yet.
But I have done all these Oz projects, and I realized long ago my interest in the Wizard of Oz and the world of Oz led me to meeting many, many people and opening up many avenues to me in my life that I would not have met or gone down if I hadn't had that interest. I knew the same thing was probably going to happen with the Trojan War when I began that project. It has happened, and I assume it'll still keep happening. And no matter what I'm interested in, if I pursue that interest, I will go places that I've never been before. But that's the way life is, right? And that's a great thing.
That's an awesome thing. Yeah, I was gonna bring up Oz, and then I realized we'd taken up an hour. So
That's fine.
What is the appeal of Oz?
I don't know. I like it. Well, I mean, the Oz for me is the book series begun by L. Frank Baum with the Wonderful Wizard of Oz in 1900. He wrote 13 sequels and some other ephemera. Other people continued his series. But what makes, I don't know. I mean, the books are, for me, they're full of adventure, humor, wonderful characters, going through things that I, as a kid, wanted to go through with them. I wanted to be on these journeys with them. There are a lot of, from a critical analytical point of view, there are a lot of problems with L. Frank Baum's work. He doesn't seem to have even understood himself what made his writing work sometimes, and at other times it didn't work. I mean, it just lies there on the page and doesn't spring to life. When it does spring to life, I think it springs to such absolute life that his work will probably live forever. Certainly, there's a reason why The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the first book, is a classic. Beyond the fact that it was adapted into a movie that is also a classic.
I think once you've hit a Broadway play that tells the story from the opposite point of view, you're immortal.
Yeah, well, we can all hope. I mean, that's what Achilles wanted too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there is obviously a life there. There's something to this book that resonates with people generation after generation. A lot of people try to figure it out and like come up with all these symbolic explanations of what the Wizard of Oz means. I think most of it is bunk.
Really?
And, oh yes.
Yeah.
Especially all the political crap that they spew.
Is that the one where
the yellow brick road is the gold standard, and the silver slippers are the silver standard, blah blah, and the lion is William Jennings Bryan, blah 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 blah.
The Tin Man is industry, and all that stuff.
Yes, all that crap. Yeah, that was developed by a man named Henry Littlefield in the late 50s. He published it in the early 60s. I met him for the first time in 1991. He was giving a talk on it, and he said very clearly, look, I never meant to say that this is what the Wizard of Oz means, or this is what was in Baum's mind. This is a way it could be interpreted. I interpreted it this way because I was teaching a summer school class of reluctant readers history, and I had to get them interested in late 19th century, early 20th century history in this class. So I used the Wizard of Oz as a teaching tool.
He used it as a metaphor.
Yes.
For his own purposes. So
yes.
So he admits it.
And
okay.
and now college courses in children's literature are saying this is what the Wizard of Oz means, and it's just like, oh, you blind fools.
It's another thing with college though, right? It's like you know, I mean, I went to college, but at the same time, it's like there's multiple ways to read things, and it's not necessarily the way that your teacher is telling you how to read it.
Right.
Right.
Which is not to say, okay, people have written about the Wizard of Oz in other ways too, in very personal ways. And if this is what the Wizard of Oz means to them personally, I have no problem with it. But if you're going to tell me this was in L. Frank Baum's mind when he wrote this, and Toto is Dorothy's animus or whatever, Toto represents this to Dorothy, I'm just going to tell you, you are full of BS. But that book is powerful enough that people feel compelled to go find all these explanations for it. So that's what I'm trying to say. This book is powerful.
Have you heard of the phenomenon called the death of the author?
I've heard of it, but I do not know what it is off the top of my head. So you might have to explain it to me.
The idea is that the author's intention isn't even something we should talk about because it doesn't we won't know unless he tells us. So it's all about how you interpret it, and then it's not to say that every interpretation is as valid as the next, because it's, you know, the whole thing, the work has to actually back you up. You can't just make something up, but it's got to back you up in terms of how you view it. And it seems to me like a lot of the people who are implanting things on it are ascribing it to L. Frank Baum, saying that this is exactly what he intended, which is, don't do that.
I agree.
He might not even remember what he intended, to be honest. What's the favorite thing about working on The Wizard of Oz that you've liked to do, like in terms of writing and drawing? Like, you have a particular character that you like drawing?
Oh, I mean, I love drawing the Scarecrow. He's possibly my favorite character to draw.
Ever?
No,
or
but
just in
the
Oz
characters.
Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. You know, favorites is really hard. I like lots of different things, and I like different things at different points in my life. But the Scarecrow is really, really good to draw.
That's interesting to me because, like, when I think of your style, I think of Age of Bronze. And so when I think of the Scarecrow, it's just the way he's drawn, his anatomy and everything. It's just the exact opposite of how I imagine your style to be. Does it give you more freedom or more visual possibilities?
Oh, yes, absolutely. His anatomy is fluid, so as he's not as hard to draw.
If you make a mistake, it's just like, oh well, that's who he is right now.
Yeah.
Is that
it's harsh in a way, yeah. I mean, I don't have to pay attention to every single strand of straw that pops off him. I don't have to make sure to keep his arm a certain length or something like that. As long as it looks good, it works. As long as it works, it works.
Do you have a particular is there any more Wizard of Oz stuff? I mean, you know, Oz stuff that's coming out that you're working on?
I always have an Oz project of some type going. Yes, I do not have any Oz comics happening right now. Oh, I have a painting that I'm working on. Where is it? It's not painted yet. I got to get this done. This is an Oz painting. This is all the witches of Oz, the wicked witches and the good witches. These are the compass witches. The compass witches, the good witch and the wicked witch of each compass direction, north, south, east, and west. There are 2 wicked witches of the south, though.
It's interesting.
Anyway.
How, like, between Oz and Age of Bronze, how do you maintain the interest across, you know, your own interest in these properties across decades?
Well, I don't know.
Does it ever wane? Does it ever wax and wane?
Sure. But both those areas of interest are really rich areas of interest. Both have so much going on with them. that it's not hard to find a different area of interest if I'm bored or hit a dead end with one thing. I'll tell you, within the last few years, whenever the most recent Age of Bronze stuff, I was dealing a lot with Troilus and Cressida, basically telling the main Troilus and Cressida story, where Cressida is taken by the Achaeans and Troilus is like bereft of her. Most of that material is not early. Most of it is medieval or later. Obviously, Shakespeare's Troilus and Cressida is Renaissance. I don't find that material as interesting as, say, the stuff that's more rooted in Greek myth, more closely rooted in the Greek material. So drawing that, working with it was a challenge, because I really had to find my way into it, to find the interest in this story. When I first read Chaucer's poem Troilus and Cressida, it was really, really hard. And I've read Trojan War stuff that's really, really awful and been fascinated by it. But Troilus and Cressida by Chaucer is considered one of his masterpieces, and it was really slow going. But I had to find my way in. So after a few years of like really trying to figure out how I was going to deal with this material, I did find my way in. It's still difficult for me, and I'm really glad I'm past it, because although I was glad to deal with it and glad to be in those characters for a while, it was hard. So I had less interest at that point in the material that was facing me with Age of Bronze. But now I'm mostly past it. I mean, last issue was Achilles and Helen on Mount Ida, which I had been waiting for years. Oh, I want to get to this scene. I love this scene, and I loved that scene, and I loved writing it. It took me a long time to write, actually, because I kept rewriting it and rewriting it. I don't know how many drafts I went through. And then when the issue came out, I'm like, it's been several years since the last issue came out. Who is still reading this? We're going digital only. No one's going to see this. I think this is possibly some of the best work I've ever done in my life. I would like to get that acknowledgement from somebody that it's really, really good. I don't know if I'm going to get that. I guess one person wrote to me and said that he really, really thought it was a real good issue. But I have not gotten that acknowledgement that I'm craving for that particular issue. That particular issue, I was really craving acknowledgement from my readers that this is an important issue. This is an important point in the story, and we understand it. I don't know if it's just because I have few readers at this point because the publication schedule is so slow, or because, which I think is most likely, is because it hasn't been collected into a book yet, and no one is reading the single issues. Everyone's only just waiting for the books. But we'll see what happens when it comes out in a book. I don't know. We'll see.
Do you see the digital numbers?
I do. I get my statements. And I don't pay very much attention to the actual numbers. So I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think.
And there was no issue before it, so I don't know. I didn't have anything to compare it to, whether readership went up or down or anything.
Well, I think I can only speak for, the certain segments of fandom that I know about. But I think a lot of the time when people don't give comments, it's because you're consistently good.
Yeah. Okay.
Because a lot of the time, especially in the age of the internet, when people do give comments, it's bad comments.
Totally. Yes, of course. Yes. And I'm on the one hand, I'm sort of fishing for compliments, and on the other hand, I'm like, I totally understand. It's just the way life is, and I'm like, I don't write into every comic that I love. So
yeah,
it took me years to like even speak to Jaime Hernandez, because I was so intimidated by him, and we were at conventions, at the same time, and I was introduced to him, but I didn't really speak to him. because I was so intimidated.
Oh yeah, like I get scared to talk to all of you. I'll be honest. It's like before every single one of these, I'm like, all right, get your head in the game.
Yeah.
And I think for some of them, you can even see me like kind of like jittering my jaw, like before, because I'm still kind of nervous at the beginning.
Oh, well,
But
you didn't seem nervous to me, so you hit it well.
thank you. And is there anything else you want to plug before we go off?
Plug. What am I doing? There's a new little. There's a follow up to Little Nemo that I wrote and Gabe is drawing. Gabriel Rodriguez is drawing. It's coming out from IDW. I do not know when. Gabe isn't finished drawing it. He has all these other projects that he's supposed to be drawing. He's about halfway through. I do not know when it's coming out, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knew. Obviously,
so little Jimmy did go back to sleep.
little Jimmy did. Obviously, I'm still working on Age of Bronze, so this issue will be coming out at some point.
You ever get tempted to go digital in terms of your?
In terms of drawing?
Yeah, in terms of drawing.
Oh, I mean, I've gone over to friends' houses who have, tablets and things like that, and I've tried them. It doesn't intrigue me. It's
the feel.
The monetary cost of like investing in all that equipment before I even know whether it's going to work for me or not is way too prohibitive. So I'm not going to do that. If I had some,
you got to be sure about that before you buy it.
Yeah. So no, I really haven't. I have played a little bit with digital, but no. I mean, most of the coloring that I do, all the coloring that I've done on Age of Bronze, which is covers, well, mostly lately is all digital. And John is coloring everything digitally, and I do all my comments for him digitally, although he redoes everything that I do, which is fine because he does it better than I do.
Yeah. That's the trick to collaboration.
Yeah.
Anything else? Or
I don't have that much coming out. I'm working on a prose nonfiction book right now, an Oz project. It is a history of the Tick-Tock Man of Oz, which was a stage musical that L. Frank Baum wrote in 1913. It was produced in 1913. I actually did a revival of it in 2014. And I wrote an article then, but I'm now expanding that into a book of the history of the entire show, plus the script that we used and the music that we used for the revival. And that'll be out in this summer. But it has nothing to do with comics, but it's Oz.
It's fine. It's fine. Thank you so much, Eric Shanower.
Thank you, Duy.
This was awesome.
It was a pleasure. It was my pleasure. It was so pleasant being able to spout off about myself.
Pleasure. The honor is returned.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you.